It is the case, and it has been changing. 32% of the House of Commons who returned in 2017 were women, but women make up 52% of the adult population. 8% of the current MPs are from black and minority ethnic backgrounds compared to 14% in the population. So there is a disproportionality there. But we've seen a lot of change since the 1990s, where I think, it's difficult to remember off the top of my head, but less than 9% of women MPs in 92, I think. So quite a massive change. And, number the ethnic minority MPs on your one hand. So there has been a lot of change, but of course we still see a huge discrepancy. And the important thing to remember, and instinctively most of us don't like the idea of what's sometimes called positive discrimination or positive action, but the reason we see 32% women MPs is because the Labour Party have used all-women shortlists in a number of elections since 1997, and that means in all their retirement seats where an incumbent MP stepped down, and half of the target seats that they hope to win, they have said that the local party, when it comes to vote for who their candidate is going to be, has to choose from a list of women. And that is the main reason that the Labour Party has a much higher percentage of women than the other parties in Parliament. Now, other parties have, the Conservative Party have improved their representation, the SNP have, but you can't ignore the fact that the numbers are higher as they are is because of this intervention. And without it, we would have seen much more incremental change. And I think one of the reasons for that is we return to the electoral system. One of the reasons, not the key reason, but one reason is that if you have an electoral system where it's proportional representation and people vote on lists, you can see in the list for your constituency from your party or however the boundaries, sometimes you give a national list, but if all the women are at the bottom, it's really striking. And so it's hard, parties are more likely, a lot of parties zip lists, so they have man, woman, for example. If you put all of one group at the bottom, it's very visible. In the UK, because we have a series of local contests, if you just happen to choose a white man, in all of those seats, each constituency might think, well, we've just chosen the best candidate. But when you look across the whole nation, you might say, well, it's a bit of a coincidence, the best candidate seems to be a white man in almost every instance. So I think that's one of the reasons that in the UK, without this kind of positive discrimination in terms of all women shortlists, change would have been very incremental and has been very incremental inside other parties. One of the things the Conservatives have been doing recently is in their retirement seats, they have been selecting ethnic minority candidates. So all ethnic minority shortlists are illegal in the UK. A special legislation was brought in so that all women shortlists can be applied for a period of time, but it's not legal for ethnic minorities. But the Conservatives have really actively sought to get ethnic minority candidates sought in retirement seats, and that's how they've raised their numbers. But so in answer to your question, slow improvement, but let's not forget one of the reasons is because of this massive intervention. I think if you look at survey evidence, most people say they'd like to see more women MPs, they'd like to see more ethnic minority MPs. When they turn up at the ballot box, they don't care whether you put a man, woman, or whoever you put in front of you, they care about the party label much more. If you ask them how they feel about all women shortlists, most people don't like them. But the problem with that, I think, is my instinct, I think the instinct of most people would be, yes, the representation of issues is more important. So as long as women's interests are represented, why should it matter? But if you look at the history of politics in the UK, prior to women entering the Labour Party and then entering the House of Commons, domestic violence wasn't really treated as a crime in the UK. Men could and did regularly beat their wives really severely without receiving punishment. Police might be called by neighbours and arrive and say, this is a domestic matter, this is a private matter. And those women politicians have changed the debate so that it's not just women who think it's an issue, it's changed the way all of society looks at that issue. And so my view is, yes, if an all-white, all-privileged, all-male parliament enacted policies in the best interests of everyone, maybe it wouldn't matter. But that's not what we've seen historically. And equally, isn't there just an argument from fairness, from justice? This is Anne Phillips famously made this case in her book about political representation. Wouldn't it seem odd? Doesn't it seem odd that, that there should be this underrepresentation, unless you think that white middle-class blokes are intrinsically more talented than everyone else? Why would there be so many compared to women and ethnic minorities? I personally the opinion that talent is equally distributed in society, and that there are barriers to participation that have been there historically that we need to overcome. Well, if you go back in not the distant past, it might seem a distant past to those of you who are starting to study now, and perhaps 18, 19. But in my lifetime, so when a report was published in the 1990s, where women candidates were asked what their husbands would do for sex if they were elected, what colour their knickers were. That isn't very long ago. It's 20 years ago. So in order to change those attitudes, that there had to be some kind of intervention. One thing you often hear about ethnic minority candidates is, well, it's not that we at the local association couldn't cope with a black MP, but the voters aren't ready. So I'm afraid discrimination still exists. It's not a level playing field. Well, I mean, there's part of me wants to say, wasn't it ever thus? I don't think politicians have ever been the most, politician versus a nurse, they've never been the most popular group, but certainly deference towards politicians has declined in the post-war period, and some of that's been a good thing, more questioning, more criticism, but it has perhaps got to the point where our particularly the expenses scandal was a turning point. Our politics, in many ways, is not as corrupt as in some other countries, and sometimes we're very quick to. But it's better news, isn't it? Corruption or politicians who are just in it for themselves. It's an easy story, and actually, a lot of politicians that you meet, most even, are decent people who really care about making a difference. And so that disaffection is a shame in a way, because the thing to do with that energy, rather than just apathy and giving up and ignoring it, is to get involved and make a difference yourself. And I do think there was a lot of discussion about declining political participation in the recent past. But look what's happened recently, a surge of membership in the Labour Party. Actually, when politics becomes more polarised, we've had arguably a period of consensus during the new Labour period in the Cameron governments, where a lot of the reforms that Margaret Thatcher brought in were largely accepted by the Labour Party, and then the moderating of that approach that the new Labour undertook was accepted by Cameron. So we had a large period where, until UKIP entered the scene, politics, there wasn't that much difference between the main parties. Nobody could argue that since Jeremy Corbyn has been elected leader of the Labour Party. And what do we see? A huge surge of membership. So I'm not sure it's quite. I think we need to do more work in this new climate to see people are still interested in politics, but perhaps there has been an argument we're more interested in single issues, less willing to compromise and work together. But I think it's an interesting time. People are getting involved. They do care. Perhaps we are more consumerist, and that idea of being given a shopping basket of policies and you've got to take them all and you can't pick and choose. We don't expect to live like that anymore. You have so much more choice in our lives in general than people had in the post-war period. Continuing after the war, you had ration books. You didn't have choice in the way that we have. Democracy does require citizenship engagement, it does, but I have some hope that I think people are more engaged. I think that people recognise there's a lot at stake. During the 90s, when we experienced a period of growth and there was the two main parties are quite close together, perhaps people felt they could disengage and get on with their ordinary life. I mean, people like myself who are really nerdily obsessed with politics didn't cease to be interested. But actually, we vote for representatives to go and do politics for us because we haven't got the time. We've got to get on with our jobs, earn our living, sort out our families. I think right now, whether you're for or anti-Brexit, for example, you can't ignore the fact that it's a huge issue. So I am sceptical as whether anti-politics exactly is the right way of phrasing how people. There are always people who are just not that interested. You'll say they're just after themselves. They're not that interested. But I actually think more people are getting involved in politics, but it's all for young people in particular. It's always much better and much easier to join a party that's idealistic. I mean, when I talked earlier on about why I didn't actually pursue life as a politician, it was, as a young person, it was the compromise involved. If you go back to the 60s and 70s, where actually, young people were embracing the 60s revolution, politics was exciting and fun. You know, in the 90s, and perhaps during the 80s too, you have a position where politics isn't perhaps, with being anti politics in the 80s was probably quite fun, but where's the entertainment value? And I think right now it is really interesting. So I'm just not convinced about the anti-politics thesis right now. I think that there are fewer people who simply give that line.